The political and legal environment of Japan. The Japanese political and legal system presents a complex picture. On the one hand, Japan is a democratic state with strong civic and legal institutions. On the other hand, the country has characteristics of non-democratic systems. It is a democracy yet just one party, the Liberal Democratic Party or the LDP has run the country almost continuously since the end of World War II. Japan is highly bureaucratic as well. Decisions affecting national policy are often made by ministries with substantial power and influence and ties to business and industrial groups. As a result, it is often said that Japan lacks the pragmatic approach to change that is common in Western democracies, and this is seen as contributing to Japan's extended economic malaise. To most foreigners, Japanese politics may appear somewhat puzzling. Policy does not seem to change regardless of whom is leading the country. And in fact, that's the argument the person in the street gives when asked about his or her lack of interest in politics. Why bother? Nothing changes. Actually, most legislation isn't produced by the members of the Diet, but by ministers and bureaucrats. The policy-making process in Japan is more similar to the parliamentary system of Europe and contrasts with the American system, in which presidential appointees attempt to exercise control over branches of the bureaucracy on behalf of the president. It's not uncommon in Japan for the influence and power of a Japanese ministry or agency to outlive the reign of a prime minister, as evident in the powerful Ministry of International Trade and Industry, better known as MITI. Not surprisingly, given the culture, the Japanese political system also has a tradition of group rather than personalized leadership. Elderly statesmen and party chiefs, agencies for very brief periods of time, and at most establish only general policy control. Recently, commentators have begun to question this lack of action. Japan's legal system is very different from what most Westerners are used to. For example, only since 1986 have foreign legal consultants been allowed to provide legal services. The requirements were modified in 1994 with the signing of the amendments to the Foreign Attorney Law. In certain types of practices, licensed legal consultants from other countries can now practice together with Japanese attorneys. Anyone planning on doing business in Japan should bear in mind that prefectures and municipalities may create laws and regulations of each other, so long as they do not contradict national laws. In other words, there are local laws and regulations in addition to laws that are consistent and uniform throughout the country. Each of the 47 prefectures may have a slightly different requirement concerning paperwork, for example. One of the most significant differences between Japanese law and the law in many other countries has to do with the power of contracts. Japanese contracts are not necessarily meant to be binding, rather founded on trust or shinyu. They are often more short statements of mutual intent. The assumption is that if a change occurs in the circumstances of the contract, the terms will be renegotiated. There are two main levels of government in Japan, which is the national and prefectural. Under the Japanese constitution, national legislative power is vested in the Diet. The prefectural assemblies of the 47 administrative prefectures have the power to govern and enact laws within the prefecture. At the more local level is a system of city, town, and village municipal assemblies. The sources of law. Japan is a civil law country governed by laws passed by parliament and interpreted by the courts. At the beginning of the Meiji era, 1868 to 1912, the German and French legal system were the model for the Japanese court and legal system. After the Second World War, a major reform of the legal system took place in Japan, with many of the revised laws being modeled on American law. Today, the Japanese legal system remains a hybrid of the continental European system and the Anglo-American system. The economic environment of Japan. The Japanese government has initiated an economic policy known as Abenomics. Through the three rows of monetary easing, a flexible fiscal policy, and structural reform. Abenomics has arguably stabilized the yen exchange rate, fattened the stock market, and helped business confidence boosted, resulting in recovering corporate investment. Steps have already been made, including negotiations with the US and others on the Trans-Pacific Partnership or TPP, and with the EU on the Economic Partnership Agreement or EPA to address the third narrow of structural reform, as well as some agricultural, energy sector, and corporate governance reforms. Challenges still lie ahead, and it remains to be seen if bolder structural reform can be achieved. The fall in the value of the yen has not increased Japan's exports as much as some had expected. Analysts suggest this is due to the offshoring in recent years of Japanese manufacturing operations and the weakening competitiveness of Japanese firms in some sectors. Japan's public sector debt, the world's largest, currently stands at over 245% of GDP. Japan increased its rate of consumption tax or VAT from 5% to 8% in April 2014. A second proposed rise in VAT to 10% has been postponed until April 2017. In December 2014, the government also announced a $29 billion stimulus package to boost the Japanese economy. As a country with limited natural resources, Japan is dependent on imports, especially oil and gas, food and raw materials for industrial production. This issue has increased in the aftermath of the 2011 tsunami that resulted in the closure of all nuclear reactors in Japan, causing a massive increase in energy imports. The gross domestic product in Japan was worth $4,601.46 billion in 2014. The GDP value of Japan represents 7.42% of the world economy. GDP in Japan averaged $2,520.98 billion from 1960 until 2014. Reaching an all-time high of $5,954.48 billion in 2012, and a record low of $44.30 billion in 1960. The GDP in Japan is reported by the World Bank Group. The gross domestic product measures of national income and output for a given country's economy. The gross domestic product is equal to the total expenditures for all final goods and services produced within the country in a stipulated period of time. Cultural environment of Japan. You should dress formally for any type of business meeting just to be safe, although there are certainly business-related events where it is appropriate to dress informally, examples such as a round of golf. It is always better to err on the overly formal side. Furthermore, your manner should be conservative. Try to avoid seeming brash or arrogant. When you meet your business partner, it is important to honor the Japanese cultural traditions. You should first bow and then wait to see if he offers a handshake. Seating arrangements are also very important in business meetings and are determined by status. You should be attentive throughout the meeting and acknowledge every member's input, as this will demonstrate that you are engaged and interested in what they have to say. Politeness and formality are characteristic of business communication in Japan. In order to successfully enter the Japanese market, it is vital that you build up good working relationships with your Japanese contacts, partners, or suppliers by respecting and following proper business etiquette. It is often said that the customer is always right, or even the customer is king. The corresponding Japanese proverb says that the customer is God. In fact, even the word customer expresses particular respect and veneration, as it means honored guest.